In this lecture, we will examine ethnicity in landscapes to include ethnic interaction, imprints, and conflict. These topics are important to geographers to better understand spatial distribution of ethnic groups, how they interact with one another, and how they may create or change a cultural landscape. Ethnic geography studies the migration and spatial distribution of ethnic groups, ethnic interactions and networks, and the various expressions or imprints of ethnicity in the landscape. Such imprints are called ethnoscapes. In other words, an ethnoscape is a cultural landscape that reveals or expresses aspects of the identity of an ethnic group. These landscapes could be shown in material culture like religious buildings, community centers, murals, restaurants, and more broadly include radio and television stations and the internet. Geographers are also interested in interactions of an ethnic group with outsiders and have developed three models to help explain these interactions. The first and oldest model is assimilation. Assimilation refers to the gradual loss of the cultural traits, beliefs, and practices that distinguish immigrant ethnic groups and their members. This model promotes the view of society as a melting pot. Many Europeans immigrated to the United States around the turn of the 20th century. My great-grandparents were two of these immigrants. They came from Denmark. My great-grandmother had told my aunt that she wanted to come to America because she heard the streets were paved with gold. She came from a very poor farming family, and during that time people were starving in Denmark. When she arrived through Ellis Island, she quickly learned English and assimilated into the American lifestyle in the way she dressed, where she lived, and what she did. The only thing that she had left from Denmark when she died was her Danish accent and some family photos. Everything else was American. The second model is pluralism. The pluralism model, by contrast, builds on the premise that members of the immigrant ethnic groups resist pressures to assimilate and retain those traits, beliefs, and practices that make them distinctive. This model promotes the view of society as a tossed salad. Ethnic enclaves were born out of this model, which are areas with a notable concentration of members of an ethnic group. The third model is heterolocalism. The heterolocalism concept means that members of an ethnic group maintain their sense of shared identity even though they are residentially dispersed. The map and photo show an example of heterolocalism in that some 40,000 Vietnamese live in and around the Washington, D.C. area, but at the level of the census tract, nowhere do they make up more than 18% of the population. By contrast, they accounted for less than 1% of the population in most census tracts. In the shopping center shown in the photo, catering to Vietnamese clientele in Falls Church, Virginia, the clock tower resembles one in Saigon, and the yellow flag is the flag of the former South Vietnam. Geographers have identified several different kinds of ethnic settlements, and three of the more common types are ethnic islands, ethnic neighborhoods, and ethnoburbs. Ethnic islands are associated with rural areas, like the area depicted in the photo. The Hopi and Navajo reservations are ethnic islands and enclaves in the United States. When mapped, we can see that they form enclaves of each other. Enclaves are units that nest within another unit. In contrast to ethnic islands, ethnic neighborhoods develop in urban areas but may vary in scale from a few city blocks to sizable districts within a city. Such places are Chinatown and Little Italy. And in Miami, Florida, you will also find Little Havana that caters to the Cuban American population. A ghetto is also a type of ethnic neighborhood and was originally used during the Middle Ages when Jews were forced to live in one district of the city. In the U.S., ghetto refers to inner-city neighborhoods with predominantly African American population. The third ethnic settlement is ethnoburbs. Ethnoburbs are a multi-ethnic residential, commercial, or mixed suburban cluster in which a single ethnic group is unlikely to form a majority of the population. Ethnoburbs are a newer phenomena and form for two reasons: economic globalization and social stratification. Many are well educated and work in jobs that are linked to highly globalized sectors of the economy, as well as economically stratified with low skill, low wage workers mixed with more affluent residents. When geographers want to know how the proportional presence of an ethnic group in a region compares to the proportional presence of that same group in the country, they use the location quotient. If the location quotient is 1, then the ethnic group in the state matches the percentage of the ethnic group nationally, and therefore it is said to be evenly represented in that state. If it is larger than 1, then the ethnic group is overrepresented, and if it's less than 1, then underrepresented. Look at the examples with Australia and the indigenous population. The table presents population data for Australia and its indigenous population, and the map shows the location quotients for each territory. Do you see the importance of a thematic map? The map shows a picture of the data in the chart and is more easily analyzed. Calculating and mapping location quotients help reveal the spatial variation and patterns of ethnic groups concentration. On a spectrum of visibility, ethnic imprints may be subtle, highly visible, or virtually anywhere between the two possibilities. For example, these symbols can be yard ornaments, restaurants, and public festivals, to name a few. Symbolic ethnicity is the way in which a collection of symbols imparts meaning and identity to members of an ethnic group. The photo shows participants in the annual Carnival Parade in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, an area with a sizable population of immigrants from the Caribbean. As a way of experiencing and enjoying traditions associated with an ethnic group, symbolic ethnicity often involves performance. Making and parading in elaborate costumes has long been a part of Carnival. Ethnic conflict is the dark side of ethnicity in that ethnic cleansing is generally the killing off of a certain ethnic group in a particular area to gain control of that area. This has been most notably seen as of late in the Darfur region of Sudan, Africa, as shown in the map. The conflict is between the sedentary farmers of African descent and the nomadic pastoralists of Arab descent. In essence, both are fighting over the same land for economic purposes. The government has done virtually nothing to help the farmers, but have provided support and equipment to separate militia known as the Janjaweed, whose members are recruited from the pastoral communities. The Janjaweed has forcibly removed farmers through ethnic cleansing. The conflict on Darfur has destroyed hundreds of villages, raised the death toll to nearly 500,000, and displaced some 2.5 million people. Another issue between ethnic groups is the lack of equity in the distribution of hazardous sites or facilities. Equity means without favoritism or bias. Environmental justice sprang out of the awareness of the location of toxic waste sites, industrial hazards, and other undesirable uses of land, and how these locations affected certain groups. It was determined that considerable amount of contaminated waste was being exported to developing countries for recycling or disposal. When this is not effectively regulated, then workers can be exposed to dangerous levels of contaminants. The example shows data from the San Francisco Bay Area that some ethnic groups are more likely than others to live near large toxic release facilities. The graph on the left shows households within 1 mile of a toxic release facility by income and race or ethnic group. The graph on the right shows the population percentage by race, ethnic group, and proximity to toxic release facility. Notice how the composition of population groups changes with increasing distance from the toxic release facility. What is interesting to note is that as whites move away, their percentage increases, but as the minority groups move away, they get smaller. Or in other words, more minorities live closer than whites. Please pause the video and answer the following. Describe how assimilation, pluralism, and heterolocalism would impact an ethnic settlement. In your own words, using the text as a guide, be thorough and specific in your answer.